All right, ready to unlock some ancient wisdom? Buckle up, because we're diving deep into Santatam Chintaye Anantam. You've been asking about this one, and let me tell you, it really gets you thinking.
It's not your typical spiritual text. Gets surprisingly practical, which I think you'll appreciate.
Oh, absolutely. Jumps right in, asking why even bother with spiritual practice. Like, shouldn't we be out there chasing success? The material stuff.
Right, and the text makes the point that all that money, fame, even intelligence, it's fleeting.
Fleeting, how so?
It's like, imagine building this incredible sandcastle at high tide. You can put your all into it, make it amazing, but eventually that tide's coming in.
Okay, I see. It's all temporary in the end. So if we can't find lasting happiness in material things, then what? Where do we even begin to look?
That's the million-dollar question, right? This text points us down a different path. It's about finding true happiness, the kind that sticks with you, unburdened by worry or constantly chasing the next thing.
This is what I love about these deep dives, getting to the core of these big questions. So how does Santatam Chintaye Anantam tackle this? What makes it so unique?
One thing that struck me is how it handles skepticism. It doesn't demand blind faith. Instead, it lays out different ways of knowing something, of proving it to yourself.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these different ways of knowing.
They're called pramanas, basically types of proof. You've got direct experience, the things we perceive with our senses. Then there's logic, using our minds to understand how things work. But then it gets really interesting with the idea of scriptural authority.
Scriptural authority, huh? That's where things can get tricky. How do we know which scriptures to trust? Which ones hold those timeless truths?
That is the question, and that's where this concept of apurishya comes in.
Opusha. Okay, break that down for me.
So a lot of scriptures, we understand them as products of their time, right? Influenced by the cultures they came from. But apurishya scriptures are different. They're described as eternal, not created by humans, but rather revealing truths that have always existed.
So these truths are out there, like laws of physics, and these specific scriptures tap into that somehow.
Exactly. They're like a direct line to those fundamental principles that govern the universe.
Wow, that's a powerful concept. It definitely makes you think about how we approach these ancient texts, doesn't it? But then the text throws us a bit of a curveball, doesn't it? Because even within these traditions, there are some seemingly contradictory ideas floating around. So how are we supposed to know which path to choose? Which one's the right one?
You're hitting on a key point. And this is where Santatam Chintaye Anantam takes a very deliberate turn away from blind faith. It actually encourages critical thinking. It's saying, don't just accept one path blindly, question it, study it, compare it with other teaching.
It's like we need to become spiritual detectives, piecing together the bigger picture from all these different clues, like that.
That's a great way to put it. It's about using our discernment, really diving deep to uncover the most complete truth. And that leads us to perhaps the biggest question of all.
Which is?
Who or what is God? That's the big one, isn't it? And the text dives right in, no hesitation. It lays out this idea of a hierarchy with Vishnu as the supreme being. But, and this is crucial, it doesn't just disregard all the other deities you might have heard of.
Oh, so it's not like, here's Vishnu, he's the only one that matters, end of story.
Not quite. It's more nuanced than that. Santatam Chintaye Anantam suggests that these other deities, they're like emanations, aspects of that one ultimate reality, Vishnu.
Aspects, like different sides of the same coin.
It's an interesting way to think about it. Imagine, say, a light shining through a prism. You see all these distinct colors, right? But they all originate from that same single source.
Okay, so maybe like different facets of the same divine energy, each expressing itself in a unique way. But that then begs the question, if we're talking about a God that's ultimately beyond human comprehension, how can we even wrap our heads around these concepts?
You're right on the money there. The text even acknowledges that. It's not about forming some perfect mental picture of God, which is, let's face it, impossible.
Right, like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
It's more about using these different descriptions, these names and forms, as pointers. Each one gives us a glimpse, a tiny window into something that's ultimately vast and beyond our full grasp.
I like that, using these concepts as pointers rather than trying to define the undefinable. It's a bit like, trying to describe the ocean to someone who's never seen it. You can talk about the waves, the salt, the sheer vastness, but until they experience it firsthand.
Exactly. It's just words. The experience is something else entirely. And this leads us to another one of those big debates that have been going on for centuries.
Oh, which one?
The path to liberation. Is it better to live a life of selfless action, the karma path, Or is it about pursuing knowledge, the jnana path? Or should we be all about devotion, the bhakti way?
Ah, the classic choose your fighter dilemma. It always felt like a bit of a which one's right kind of
Yeah,
question.
like we have to pick just one. But this text, as always, throws us a bit of a curveball. It argues that these paths, they're not actually mutually exclusive.
You mean we don't have to choose?
Yeah.
We can have it all.
Not quite have it all, but think of it more like this. Knowledge without action, it's like having a map but never leaving your house. Action without knowledge, that can lead you down some pretty interesting paths, but not necessarily the one you intended. And devotion, well, that's the fuel, the driving force that keeps you going on the journey.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this fits together. It's like, say, baking. If you want to bake an amazing cake, you need the right ingredients. That's your knowledge. And you need the right process, the steps to follow. That's your action. But you also need that passion, that love for baking to really make it something special. And that's where the devotion comes in.
Now you're getting it. It's that spark, that inner fire that propels you forward. And this actually brings us to a very interesting concept. The idea of the self, the jivatma, and its connection to the divine, the paramatma.
Well, yeah, that's something I wanted to ask you about, this whole idea of the individual self and the universal self, how they relate to each other.
It's a mind bender for sure. The text uses this really helpful analogy of a mirror reflecting another mirror and so on, creating this almost infinite chain of reflections. Each reflection, while distinct, is ultimately connected back to that original source.
So our individual selves, we're like those reflections, each one a tiny piece of that larger divine consciousness.
Precisely. We are unique expressions of that one source, but still part of that greater whole. And just like those reflections in the mirrors, while we are individual expressions of the divine, we're not exact replicas. There's this hierarchy, a spectrum of beings, each reflecting the divine in varying degrees, you could say. And it's this connection, this understanding of our inherent unity with the divine that forms the basis of our spiritual journey.
So it's not just about me, myself, and I. We're all connected, all part of this grand cosmic reflection.
Exactly. But then the question arises, if we're all part of this unified consciousness, why does God, or the divine, take on different forms? What's the deal with those avatars we often hear about, like Rama or Krishna?
Right. Like, if everything's already connected, why bother with these different incarnations? Are they just there to keep things running smoothly in the universe?
That's a common interpretation, but Santatam Chintaye Anantam offers a really fascinating perspective on this. It explains that these avatars, they're not just about cosmic housekeeping, they're more like divine interventions. They're opportunities for the divine to directly interact with creation, to guide, inspire, and even reveal aspects of the divine nature that we might not otherwise grasp.
So it's like God stepping into the creation, showing us what's possible.
Precisely. Think of it as God saying, let me show you what it means to embody these qualities, these virtues, and how you can connect with me on a deeper level.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But what about the act of creation itself? This text doesn't just gloss over that, does it?
You're right, it doesn't. Santatam Chintaye Anantam goes into some fascinating detail. It breaks down the creation of the universe into this intricate eightfold process, this amazing dance of energy and consciousness.
So it's not just like, poof, here's a universe.
Not quite. It highlights the intentional, meticulous nature of how this universe came to be. It's like a carefully orchestrated symphony, each note, each instrument playing its part to create something truly awe-inspiring.
That's pretty amazing. But what about us? What about liberation? What does it actually mean to achieve this ultimate state, this freedom from suffering? And how do we even get there?
Ah, the million-dollar question. And here's where Santatam Chintaye Anantam challenges some common assumptions about liberation. Many see it as this passive state, you reach it and then you're done. This text, though, says, not so fast. It argues that liberation is an ongoing process, a continuous striving even after we've reached those higher levels of understanding.
So it's not like climbing a mountain, reaching the summit and going, well, I'm enlightened now. What's next?
Not quite. It's more like you reach the summit, you take in the view, and then you realize there's a whole other mountain range in the distance. The journey continues, the exploration never really ends.
So it's not a one-time achievement, but a continuous unfolding, a constant evolution. I like that. It's a bit less pressure too, isn't it?
Yeah, no pressure to become perfectly enlightened overnight. This text really emphasizes that. It's more about the journey, the continual striving to live in alignment with those deeper truths.
Okay, so we've talked about this idea of liberation being an ongoing process, but this text also doesn't shy away from outlining specific practices, does it?
You're right. It gets into the nitty-gritty, which I appreciate. But there's a bit of a twist, as usual, right? It's not just about renouncing the world and meditating in a cave.
Right, because that's not exactly practical for most of us, is it?
Not really. Santatam Chintaye stresses that true liberation isn't about escaping the world, but about engaging with it mindfully and purposefully.
So it's about finding that balance, bringing that spiritual awareness into our everyday lives, not seeing them as separate things.
Exactly. It's about integrating those practices, those insights into the fabric of our daily experience. And that can look different for everyone, right?
Wow.
Which leads us back to that question you had about the different deities and how they all fit into this picture.
Oh yeah, that's right. We got a bit sidetracked with that whole liberation discussion.
Happens all the time. But it's all connected, isn't it? So back to those deities. Think of it like this. Imagine a vast, intricate tapestry, right?
Yeah, a tapestry.
Vishnu, as the supreme being, he's like the weaver, the one who sets the grand design. But all those other deities, they're like the individual threads, each with its unique color, its texture, all contributing to the beauty and complexity of the whole.
Okay, so instead of thinking of them as separate gods, it's more like they're different expressions of that same divine energy, each playing a specific role in the grand scheme of things.
That's the idea. And what's really interesting is that the text goes even further. It even suggests that those seemingly negative or destructive forces, they also have their place in this cosmic orchestra.
Whoa, hold on. Even the bad guys.
Remember how we talked about liberation being possible even for people who've done things we might consider bad? Well, this is where that starts to make more sense. It's a pretty profound shift in perspective.
It definitely challenges some assumptions, doesn't it? So it's less about judging actions as inherently good or bad, and more about understanding how they all fit into this larger cosmic dance, this unfolding of the universe.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even those who make what we might call mistakes, they're still on a journey, right? They're still evolving, moving towards that same source, just maybe taking a more scenic route.
A more scenic route. I like that. It's a bit more forgiving, isn't it?
Definitely. It encourages compassion, understanding. And the text argues that this understanding, this recognition of our interconnectedness, it can profoundly impact how we see the world and ourselves.
It's like that saying, everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. This text kind of takes it to a whole other level, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It reminds us that everyone is on a spiritual journey, even if it doesn't look like ours. And that brings us back to those Jivatma and Paramatma concepts, the individual self and the universal self. Remember, you were curious about that connection.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a bit of a mind bender, this whole idea of how our individual selves relate to that ultimate source.
For sure. The text uses the analogy of a mirror and its reflection, which I think is really helpful. It suggests that our individual selves, they're like reflections of that one divine consciousness. We're each a spark of that ultimate reality.
Okay, so we're all connected, all part of that same source, just manifesting in these incredibly diverse ways, like infinite possibilities within that one unity.
Beautifully put. But the text doesn't stop there. It goes on to talk about a hierarchy of beings, a spectrum of consciousness, each level reflecting the divine to different degrees, you could say.
So it's not about being better or worse, more like recognizing that we're all at different points on this journey, this path of unfolding.
Precisely. And the really exciting part is that we're not fixed. We're not stuck at any one level. Just like those reflections in the mirror, we can choose to move closer to the source, to cultivate those qualities that bring us into greater alignment with that divine spark within.
This whole idea of a spiritual journey is both humbling and empowering, isn't it?
Yeah.
But where do we even begin? How do we actually navigate this path? I mean, the text talks about different types of spiritual practices, but it can feel overwhelming, you know?
I hear you. It can definitely feel like a lot. But here's the thing. Santatam Chintaye Anantam is really clear about one thing. It emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
So no magic formula, no one right way to do things.
Nope. It's about finding the practices that resonate with you, that fit your temperament, your unique stage of growth. It's like having this spiritual toolbox. Each tool has its purpose, but it's up to you to experiment, to see what works best for you.
So it's more about tuning into ourselves, listening to our own inner guidance, rather than blindly following some external set of rules.
Exactly. And the text encourages us to be patient with ourselves, to approach our practice with curiosity, even playfulness. It's not about being perfect. It's about enjoying the journey.
That's such an important reminder, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in the shoulds and shouldn'ts of spiritual practice. But ultimately, it's about that inner transformation, that connection with something greater than ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think Santatam Chintaye Anantam does a brilliant job of highlighting that.
This whole deep dive has been packed with so many thought-provoking ideas. From that concept of Acharya scriptures to the idea of a divine hierarchy, the nature of liberation, and the importance of integrating these practices into our lives, it's really given us a lot to ponder.
It has. And I think that's what this text ultimately encourages us to do, to keep thinking, keep questioning, to remain curious about these big questions. Because the journey of self-discovery, it's a lifelong adventure. And this text, it's like having a wise old sage whispering guidance in our ear as we navigate the path.
Beautifully said. So as we wrap things up here, we leave you with this. If every action, every thought, every experience is a step on this path of spiritual evolution, what choices will you make today to align yourself with your highest potential? Until next time, keep exploring, keep diving deep, and keep that ancient wisdom flowing.